large screen. Here we go. All right, so what we're gonna do today, we're gonna talk about animal tongue. So I tried to pick some topics that maybe a lot of people aren't super familiar with, or they kind of know a little bit about, but don't really know the inner workings of it. So that's what we're gonna be talking about today. If you guys have any questions, feel free. We're gonna have a little question and answer series at the end. It is just me doing this today, so I can't quite answer the chats if you do have questions. So please save those questions for the end, and I will make sure I give 5 or so minutes to answer all your questions if I can. So, all right, we'll go ahead and get started. So first off, I want to talk about what is a tongue. I'm sure all of us know we have a tongue. You use it every day. I'm using it right now to talk. I used it earlier to drink a glass of water. I use it to eat. I use it to talk. There's many different reasons that we use our tongue, but why do we have one, and what exactly is this thing that we're using? So it's a set of movable muscles. There's actually 8 inner working muscles that supply blood and have nerves. So again, if you bite your tongue, or if you chew something like a taco shell or a chip that's really hard, you're gonna feel it's gonna hurt, right? Because it has nerves in there. And there's also a dense layer of what we call connective tissue. So this is probably getting into the weeds a little bit, but it is kind of interesting to learn about what is this in your mouth. There's also a special mucus that covers the top layer of your tongue. So not is that just saliva, but it's a part of the saliva. It makes saliva, but saliva is actually a different component of what's in your mouth. That membrane, that mucus layer on top makes up saliva, but saliva is actually a whole different thing than what's in your mouth. If you look at the top of your tongue, that is called the dorsum, and it's covered with these really tiny little, they look like dots. Those are your taste buds, and they contain taste buds, and they're called papillae. We'll talk about those a little bit later in some animals and how that relates to animals, but now you kind of know what's in your mouth. All right, a little bit more here. So your taste buds. A lot of you guys have different tastes. You like salty foods, you like sweet foods, you like bitter foods. All of those different tastes are in your mouth. Sometimes people say that there's this thing called a taste map. That's actually wrong. It's not certain areas of your mouth that only taste salty, or certain areas that only taste bitter. All taste buds will do different things, and they will taste all those different flavors. So they're all over your mouth. When you taste something, whether you like it or not, that information goes up to your brain. So if you eat ice cream, I really like ice cream. So if you eat ice cream, you're gonna notice that that taste is gonna go up to your brain and say, oh, that's really good, or that's cold, or that's super sweet. I really like that. So those receptors are those nerve endings. There's actually a chemical reaction happening when you eat your food. Sometimes you might have learned about chemical reactions in school and how they can be kind of scary or bad, not in your mouth. So those chemical reactions are you tasting your food. So in people, there's about 50 to 150 taste receptor cells in each taste bud. So if you look on your tongue and you count every single little taste bud, each of those has 50 to 150 other little receptors in there that help you eat your food. So again, kind of getting into the weeds, but I think it's super cool. And that is the whole point of this Science Of series. We're talking about the science behind some of these things. All right, so why do animals have a tongue? I love this picture of the river otter too. It's adorable, but there's used for swallowing food, for chewing, for speech. There are some animals that make lots of noises, and then there's some animals that don't. And then also taste. Sometimes if you've ever fed your dog something that maybe you didn't want, like broccoli or pizza or something like that, the taste that we taste that we know as pizza is going to be different than how a dog tastes it, or how a cat tastes it, or how a mountain lion tastes it. They're going to understand that it's bitter or sweet or salty, but they might not taste exactly what we taste, if that makes sense. It's different than what people do. And then tongues are also, it's a part of their survival. And if they don't have them, or they don't use them properly, or they don't work properly, animals can die. So they're a super important organ in our mouths, and we really need them. So we're gonna talk about some different animals in Nebraska and why they have them, and kind of some weird tongues of the animal kingdom. And again, we're gonna be talking about Nebraska species. So, all right, we're gonna cover birds. Birds have actually super weird tongues. We're gonna talk about 3 different birds today. I bet some of you maybe can already think about one that I'm going to talk about. It's kind of like the go-to poster child for weird tongues. That's going to be a woodpecker. So hopefully all of you know what a woodpecker is. We have a few species here in Nebraska, but they have super long tongues. We know that they use their tongues because they are omnivores. They feed on things like insects, spiders, arthropods, and then they bang their heads or their beaks onto dead or decaying trees so that they can get those insects out of there and eat them. Well, if you think about it, those insects aren't right there at the top on the bark. They need to drill into the wood to be able to get their food. So they have those long tongues to get in there, reach around and grab it. So we have different types of species of woodpeckers in Nebraska. We have things like pileated woodpeckers, hairy woodpeckers, downy woodpeckers. They're all going to have different lengths of tongues, and it just kind of depends on what they're eating. Just like people have different adaptations and animals have different adaptations for what we are doing to help them survive, they have different tongue lengths, and it just kind of depends on how they forage for things. So some species have longer tongues, some species have shorter tongues. And when we talk about short tongues, they're still very long compared to what we have. All right, so woodpecker tongue, most of them are going to be long and narrow, and they have a assortment of these backward projecting barbs at the very tip. All right.
It's funny that you had to like qualify which rank it is because we know multiple ranks.
Mute your microphone. That would be so helpful. Thank you.
So like a vendor like from irrigating you or whatever it's called.
So we will use some of the things as a spear. They penetrate and then they drag the insect to the wood, and then they are able to grab those insects. Those are very few amount of woodpeckers. Most of them actually just use it as a rake. So if you've ever raked up leaves in your yard, it's the same concept as a woodpecker using those tongues. So they extend it into the hole and then they retract everything back into their mouth. So for them to do that, they also need to have a really sticky tongue. They need lots of sticky saliva that they are able to coat and enhance that ability to capture those insects and bring them in. It's just like touching, if you ever had masking tape on your finger and then you try to pick up stuff, same concept. All right, next page. So all of these different insects or all these different woodpeckers, where do they store this super long tongue? Some of you might know the answer. Basically, in short, their tongue wraps around their skull. Every time I talk to kids about this and how it wraps around their skull, the one question I always get is, can they taste their brain? I'm not sure. I don't think that's how it works, but again, I'm not a woodpecker. I don't know. So the bones and the muscles attached to the tongue, they run over the brain, around the side of the head, underneath the lower jaw, and into the mouth where those bones meet. This sounds super confusing. So here's a cool little diagram to help you see it. This is actually what it looks like. So some of their tongues are so long, they actually will go into their nostril cavity, as you can see in this picture. So think of a tape measure is always how I kind of imagine it. When you pull out that tape measure, it retracts inside, same concept, or like a fruit roll up or something. You pull it out and then it goes back in. So they need such long tongues because they need to reach into those trees and those holes in the trees and bring their food into them. All right, so different types of woodpeckers in Nebraska have different types of tongues. We talk about downy, hairy, red-bellied, red-headed woodpeckers. They all feed on fruits, so their tongues are somewhat long, somewhat short. It depends on how many barbs they have. It just depends where they forage and what type of different things that they're eating or where they are eating. So flickers are also a type of woodpecker. They're a little bit larger. They eat more ants than any other North American bird, and they have a flattened tongue with tons of barbs. And they also have with few barbs and tons of saliva on them. They also have the longest tongue out of any woodpecker, so they need that long, sticky tongue to be able to grab all those ants that they are eating. We also have something called a pileated woodpecker, and if you're familiar with woody woodpecker, that is what he is. So he has a long, but I guess a short tongue. It's the shortest, longest woodpecker tongue, if that makes any sense. They excavate deep into the trees and they are super barbed because they need to grab all those things deep inside of the trees. We also have something called sapsuckers. They are short and they have very bristle-like tongues. It is almost like a paintbrush. And when they're adapted to feeding for sap, and those bristles help absorb it through that capillary action. if you aren't familiar with capillary action is, it would be like when you lay a wet or a paper towel on something wet, and all of that kind of soaks up into it. It kind of just absorbs it. So that's what capillary action is. All right. I think I had someone have a question here. I want to make sure that I wasn't something major. Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and talk about hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are another similar tongue to a woodpecker, but still a little bit different. Their food sources are different. Since 1833, scientists kind of thought that they also use that capillary action. So again, like laying a paper towel on something wet and it absorbs it. They thought that the liquid flowed through the narrow areas, working against gravity to basically slurp up that nectar. They thought that this was the case for the longest time because their tongue looked like a cylinder. However, if you've ever seen the hummingbird, they do everything very quickly, very fast. I guess I'd be like a hummingbird. I just do everything like I'm on a mission all the time. So that is kind of how this bird uses it. They have to do everything really quickly. So capillary action would be fine, but however, it's too slow. So scientists kind of figured out within the last couple decades that this is not true. They don't use capillary action. They do something totally different. So what do? They use their tongue as a micro pump. So it allows the birds to feed super rapidly on that nectar. It's a little similar to a drinking straw. If you guys ever sucked liquid out of a straw before, you use your cheeks to create a vacuum and then suck that liquid out. It's the same concept, but without the vacuum. And I know that sounds super confusing, but they work very similar to sucking up through a straw. Again, on this picture, you can see it's very similar to the hummingbird or to the woodpecker. They have a very long tongue and it almost wraps around their brain. Again, I don't know if they can taste their brain, maybe, but that is how their tongue sits into their skull. All right, so hummingbird tongues. When you ever see a hummingbird, they're always going super fast. They're hovering, they're zipping from flower to flower. So when they go to slurp up nectar, they actually flatten their tongue and it remains flat until they touch that nectar. When they touch that nectar, it kind of blows up and reshapes and it grabs all that nectar and fills it up. The top part of the tongue bends so that it's not flat, and then it stores that elastic energy in there, and that energy helps draw up that nectar from the flower into the bird's mouth. So it's flat, and then when they touch that nectar, it inflates, and then they slurp up that nectar. So the fluid at the tip is driven into the tongue's mouth by the grooves that are forced from that re-expansion of the tongue. So if you guys think about it, it's like blowing up a pool or an air balloon or something like that. So it's flat, and then you pump that air into it, it expands, and it grabs all of that nectar. So this works a lot better than that capillary action. It's just too slow for these birds. Again, they do everything very quickly. So this fast technique allows the birds to drain about 5 to 10 drops of nectar in 15 milliseconds. That's about 1/100th of a second. So very quickly, they can slurp up a lot of nectar and move on to the next flower. So very similar to woodpeckers, but again, a little bit different. All right, we're gonna move on to amphibians. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about, that and reptiles. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about, anyone wanna guess what kind of amphibians we're gonna talk about? If you guys wanna unmute your microphones for a second, anyone wanna guess? I see some hands raising. Does anyone wanna guess what kind of tongues amphibians we're gonna talk about? Yeah, you guys know it, say it.
Frog. Frog.
Yeah, good. We're going to talk about frogs. So if you've ever watched a frog eat, you're very lucky because it's super fast. When you look at a frog, there's this guy. His name was Augustus Waller. He was so fascinated by the soft, sticky tongue that he did a bunch of studies, and he did the very first study ever on frog tongues. A lot of people also have a lot of misconceptions about what they look like, what do they do. People think they're very long tongues, and they are relative to the size of their body. It's about 1/3 of the length of them. But if you think about it, frogs are not very big. There's the Goliath frog, which is ginormous. But in Nebraska, we have something called a tree frog, and they're only about this big. So maybe 2 inches at the absolute most. That's a really fat frog, but like a very, like 2 inches long. So their tongue is only about the third the size of their body. If our tongue was a third the size of our body, we could all touch our belly buttons with our tongue. So if you think about it, that would be a super long tongue going and touch your belly button. But with frogs, it's not as long. So a frog's tongue is actually attached to the front of the mouth, which allows it to launch really, really fast. They can shoot out their tongue, grab an insect, and pull it back in their mouth in 0.07 seconds, which is 5 times faster than you can blink. So if you all try and blink as fast as you can for about 2 seconds, frogs have already eaten like 3 or 4 insects by that time that you can blink, because it is that fast. The insects that are caught by these frogs, they experience about 12 times the force of gravity when they impact on that insect. Astronauts only experience about 3 times the force of gravity in a rocket launch. So if you guys watched the rocket launch just a couple months ago, they were experiencing about 3 times the force of gravity. When a frog tongue hits like a cricket or an insect, they experience about 4 times as hard as that. So 12 times the force of gravity. So it's very fast and it's a very big impact. And then they drag that insect into their mouth. Another misconception is how sticky their tongues are. I don't know if you guys have seen some cartoons where a tongue or a frog will grab something and it will stick to everything because their tongue is so sticky. It's actually not true. If their tongue was sticky all the time, it would stick its mouth together and that wouldn't help the frog. The tongue actually produces that mucus too, the really kind of saliva-y stuff, right before it grabs the insect. So as it is going to hit that insect, it produces mucus so that it's really sticky and it can grasp and fill any of the cracks in the exoskeleton and then grab that food and bring it into its mouth. So that mucus is actually 5 times stickier than honey. So if you've ever had like a honey sandwich or put honey on your biscuit or something like that, that stickiness, it's 5 times stickier than that, their tongue is. Their tongue is also really strong. They can lift something about 1.4 times their own body weight. So if we did that, it would be like our tongue holding a refrigerator. So an insect, some of our toads and frogs actually eat mice. So again, it's a lot heavier than their tongue is. But again, 1.4 times their own body weight. So that's a heck of a strong tongue. All right, their tongue is also made up of 2 big muscles. One is called the extender, it extends out, and the other is called the retractor. So the extender fires out that tongue at 4 meters a second. This is again, 1 second, that's all it is. And then that retractor muscle yanks the tongue back like a bungee cord. So if you've ever put something in the bed of your truck and use those bungee cords and it snaps back on you, it's the same concept as a frog tongue. Their tongue is also 10 times softer than ours. It's similar to brain tissue. It has the same texture as brain tissue is. So that makes it super flexible so that it can grab and wrap around things. And then to dislodge their prey, so once they grab something, they bring it into their mouth, they got to get rid of it. So they actually suck their eyeballs into their head, and then that pressure from their eyes makes the prey fall off, and then the prey is swallowed whole. So if you've ever watched a frog, they blink a lot, like super hard. And what will happen is their eyes are actually pushing that food from their mouth all the way down to their stomach. And I can tell you about it all that you want, but you're never gonna understand what it looks like. So we don't have frogs, but I do have a toad, same kind of concept. So here is our Woodhouse's toad that I will show you. Kind of hard to see, but here is our Woodhouse's toad. Her name is Fatty Fat Pat, and you can see her eyes. So if I touch her eyes, they'll kind of go down like buttons. It's the same concept. So if she would eat something, she would blink really hard, and that force, that pressure, will push that food all the way down into her stomach. So kind of cool. I wish you guys could touch her. She's really neat. You can see, being very gentle. I'm just kind of touching her eyes, and they will go down like buttons. So really neat. And she just watered all over my computer. So awesome. All right, so there's our frogs. All right, mammals. We're gonna move on to one mammal that I bet some of you guys maybe even have in your house, maybe not the ones that we're going to be talking about, but they're cousins. Does anyone want to guess what kind of mammal tongues we're going to be talking about? Remember, this is in Nebraska. Anyone have any guess? I will give you one hint. I will pretend that I'm doing this. Anyone have a guess on what kind of animal does that? Oh, I see your hands. What do you guys think?
Cat.
Yeah, a cat. So good, a cat. Yeah, so if you guys have cats at home, if you've ever licked, or not licked them, but they've licked you, and you felt they kind of feels like sandpaper, that's the closest thing that you can think of when they touch their tongue. It's really sharp and it's rough, right? So we're gonna talk about cat tongues. So in Nebraska, we have two big major cats. We have a bobcat and a mountain lion. They are related to your house cats that you have at home. The size is a little different and their habitats are different and what they eat is a little bit different, but they are related to each other. So if you guys have a cat, you've also probably watched them clean themselves or groom. Cats do this a lot. They clean and groom a lot during their day and then they sleep and eat and that's about it. So cats, domestic and wild cats, if you zoom in on their tongue, and I mean really zoom in with a microscope, this is what you're gonna see. This picture that I have, it almost looks like little cat claws, but this is what their tongue, remember those papillae that we talked about, the little bumps on your tongue? This is what theirs look like. So if you've ever touched them or had a cat lick you and it's really rough and sharp, that is what's licking you or touching your hands. Those are all those little projection or barbs that are on their tongues. So these things are made of keratin. Does anyone know what else is made of keratin? Yeah, what is it?
Nails.
Nail and fingers.
Yeah, your fingernails, your toenails, your hair is actually made of keratin. If you ever look at the claws on or the talons on a bird, the shell of a turtle, the rattle on a rattlesnake, all those things are made of keratin, the same stuff that your fingernails are made out of. So those little projections on their tongue made of the same stuff that your fingernails are made out of. So if you ever watched a cat, if they get like a hairball or something, you'll notice that they really work on that. And they will have, be able to use their kind of sharp tongues to get rid of those tangles or those knots. So that's another reason why they lick and they clean all the time. They also transfer large amounts of saliva from the mouth to the fur. So people might, why would you want to do that? Well, one, they're cleaning themselves. And two, it acts as a cooler. So on a hot day like today, you guys might see cats licking themselves. They're transferring all that saliva to make their body more cooler. So that saliva will kind of drain down through their hair and then touch their skin. It's actually about a 30-degree difference. So on a 100-degree day, their skin is going to feel like it's about 70 degrees. So it feels a lot better because it's so hot outside. Cats actually spend, I think it was like a fifth of a cup of saliva onto their skin every single day. So if you have a cup, 5 of those, 5 little half cups there will make as much saliva as a cat sticks onto their skin every day. So it's quite a bit. It helps them clean and it lowers their body temperature as that saliva evaporates over time. All right, so cat tongues not only help them clean, but it also helps remove parasites and eggs that might get into their skin. And it also redistributes special oils that's on their cat's skin. And it also waterproofs them. So a lot of people say don't give your cats baths if you can help it, because all those oils that are on your cat's skin, they decrease over time if you give them baths. So again, you don't really need to give them a bath if they're licking themselves all the time and they're cleaning themselves. Cats are also what we call obligatory carnivores. So they only will eat meat. Even if you feed them cat food, that cat food is specially made because it is all meat products. So they need that to be able to survive. And if you ever watched a cat yawn, they have a wide mouth. Even your domestic house cats at home, they have that wide mouth so that they can grasp on and hold on to their prey. And then those papillae, those little barbs on their skin or on their tongue, they help strip the flesh off bones. So if you think about like a large mountain lion, if it eats something, it needs to get every single little piece of meat off there, and their tongue is so rough that if they lick that bone, enough of that skin will come off that they can eat it. So you notice that picture to the right here, that is actually a lion, like an African lion's tongue. I know it doesn't look very big, but you can see all those little kind of pokey projections towards the bottom there. Those are all those papillae, those little barbs that are on their tongue. All right, here is those little papillae, those little hooks in different species of snakes. So you can see like a house cat, bobcat, tiger, cougar, all those things. So a study found that they actually are hollow. So kind of like deer hairs, they're hollow. They're hollow at the base, and then where it's attached to the surface of the tongue. They make kind of that little U shape, as you can see. And there was a super cool study that was done that a lady fed her cat a pork chop, and part of that blood and that meat actually stuck into the papillae, just like a quill. So if you guys ever watch Harry Potter, he uses a quill to write. It soaks up the ink so that he can write down on it. It's the same concept as that papillae on that tongue. So it actually soaks up that liquid. Here's a cool little diagram of how actually large tongues are in the cat category here. Bobcat and house cat are very similar to each other. But then when you move into like a tiger and a lion, they get a lot bigger and they have more papillae on them because they're eating different things and eating more of that meat. All right. Yep, that was it. All right, so we have reptiles. Anyone want to guess what kind of reptiles we're going to be talking about as far as their tongues? This one's kind of easy. There's actually a lot that we could talk about, but what's like the stereotypical reptile that we're going to talk about their tongue? Yeah, if you guys know it, what is it?
Chameleon.
Ooh, a chameleon. That's a good one. Think of Nebraska, though. You might see them around your garden, or you might see them around a lake. Yeah, what is it?
Snake.
A snake. You have cool tongues too. We'll talk about those kind of later, but yeah, I want to focus on snakes right now. Good. All right, so snake tongues. They have the coolest tongues out of anybody in the animal kingdom. And what do they do with their tongue? Do you guys know? What do they do with their tongue? Yeah.
They smell.
Good, they smell. So the closest thing that scientists can come up with is that they smell with their tongue. Have you ever watched a snake? Their tongue is actually forked into two. This helps them because they can smell in 3D. So every time they flick their tongue out, it takes scent particles from different parts of where you're sitting. It's kind of like when you hear a siren and you don't know where it is coming from. Your ears help you point out where that noise is coming from. Same concept with their tongue. So if they taste something and it tastes stronger on the left side, they know that that food is on the left side. Or if it's on the right, they know it's on the right. So it picks up locations or smells in different parts, and then they can direct where that smell is coming from. All right, so snakes also do have kind of a nose, and we call that vomeronasal sense. So snakes actually have 6 senses. They don't replace their sense of smell with their tongue. It's just another one. So not only do they smell with their tongue, but they use their nose because it helps attract, or it helps them find females. So those pheromones that females will send out, so they know where to find, so males know where to find them. They use their vomeronasal organ for that. It also helps them detect food and to follow their prey. All right, so when a snake flicks its tongue out, it collects those odor particles, and then it sips its tongue into its mouth, and those particles go to a sensory organ in the mouth called the Jacobson's organ. So this is only accessible when their tongue comes in, and it goes to 2 separate little categories up here, little caverns, I guess. Those grooves actually help smell. So all that scent particles that the snake is picking up, he goes up into the nose, and then it sends signals to the brain saying, oh, I think that's a mouse, or I don't know what that smell is. So it helps a lot with the snake to smell. And that Jacobson's organ is super important for snakes to have. All right. To smell, the particles that the Jacobson's organ picks up, we kind of talked about this, those 2 little grooves allows the particles to travel up to the sensory organ and then helps it be able to smell. So again, I can talk about this all I want, but you guys can't really see it for yourself. So I have a friend with me who's going to help kind of show this. His name is Petey, and he's one of our education animals here at Game and Parks. He's very nice. He is called a Western fox snake. So I'm going to bring him up so that you guys can see him here. I will try to hold him as close as I can, and you can hopefully then see him. If I get in front of the camera here, he does not want to stay. You can see him flicking his tongue out, and if you look very closely, you can see that his tongue is forked. So every time he sticks his tongue out, he is grasping those little scent particles and bringing him up to his Jacobson's organ up in his mouth and able to smell. Right now I have the toad sitting over here, and he keeps looking over here. So if he smells that toad, he's gonna know that that toad is over to his right because it smells stronger than it does on the left side. It's kind of like, again, if you guys make cookies in your house and you're not in the same room as the cookies, you can still smell them. Same concept. All right, hopefully all of you saw him. All right. All right, so I've covered a lot of tongues that are in Nebraska, but I do have to admit there's a lot of cool tongues that we don't have here in Nebraska. I'm sure some of you know them. I heard chameleon was one of them. That's a good one to talk about. So I'm gonna really quickly talk about some non-native species that we have and just some cool facts about their tongue. All right, so one of them is a chameleon. I heard someone talk about that earlier. So chameleon's tongue is almost twice as long as its body, and their saliva is about 400 times stickier than ours, and it can lift something about 3 times as heavy as their body. So if you weigh 200 pounds, let's say you weigh 150 pounds, 3 times as heavy as your own body, your tongue can lift that. So that's huge. That way your prey would have to be ginormous if we were chameleons. But again, they're only about this big sometimes, and they can lift something that's 3 times as heavy as their own body. Flamingos, I did not even think about this when I learned this when I was doing this presentation. They have spiny bristles on their tongue when you look at their inside of their mouth, and those spines, they actually fill with blood and become rigid, and it helps them stabilize their head when they dunk it upside down in the water. So those little bristles help the animal survive and help it eat and stabilizes its brain. We don't have alligator snapping turtles in Nebraska. We have just regular snapping turtles. But if you ever look at the inside of an alligator snapping turtle's mouth, their tongue looks like a little lure that you would use to go fishing. Looks like a small worm, and that attracts fish because they want to see what that is, and they think it might be something to eat. And then that turtle sits very, very still, and when that fish comes close enough, it will snap down onto the fish. If you know what a pangolin is, it kind of looks like a pine cone with a really long tongue, but their tongue is about 2 feet in length, so 2 rulers, and it is so long that instead of attaching to the roof of their mouth, it attaches to their pelvis. So our pelvis is where our hip bones are, and our legs and our top torso meet together. So that's a huge tongue. All right. Someone mentioned earlier about skinks. We do have skinks in Nebraska, but there's one that we don't have here called a blue-tongued skink. It has an orange tongue. I'm just kidding. Of course, it's blue. That's why it's called a blue-tongued skink. Their thought is that it is a defensive mechanism. They think that it kind of scares away and confuses predators so that they don't want to eat it. So a lot of times when you Google search blue-tongued skink, they always have their tongue sticking out. That's because they don't want to get eaten. It's a defense mechanism. All right, giraffes. My daughter loves giraffes, so we love feeding the giraffes at the zoo. So if you've ever fed them at the Lincoln Children's Zoo, you know how long their tongues are, and you know what they look like, and you know that they're super sticky. They're about 2 feet long, and they're the most muscular tongues out of any hoofed animal. They're also a dark, kind of a purplish black color. Scientists think that they're that color so that they don't get sunburned. They eat a lot of food. They eat pounds and pounds of food every single day, and their tongue is out a lot. So they think that it's purple because they don't want to get sunburned. It just protects them from getting sunburned. And then a blue whale, largest mammal that we have. Their tongue alone weighs about 2.7 tons. That's like a car, or as heavy as a full-grown elephant. And then their tongues push all that excess water out of their mouth and leaves just the krill behind. So again, not from Nebraska, but still super cool tongues, and kind of just some interesting facts about them. All right, so that was all that I have. We can certainly do a question if you guys have any questions here. Next week, for those of you guys that have to go, next week if you want to join us at same time, 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock-ish, next Thursday, July 16th, we will be talking about scat. So if you don't know what scat is, it's poop. It's a fancy word for animal poop. We're going to talk about the science behind scat and why scat is so cool and how to identify scat and what's in scat. We're going to literally get down and dirty into the scat. So we're going to talk about that next week. All right, and also if you guys want to join us, again, this is a 6-week series. We're going to be talking about the science of natural things that we have in animals. So next week it'll be scat. We're going to talk about bites and stings, predators, animal love, and then animal myths. So please keep joining us if you have the chance. It's kind of a fun little series that we're doing. But if you guys certainly have any questions, I think that's all that I have. But please join us next week if you're able to. If you are not able to, or you know someone that wanted to join today and they couldn't, we will be recording these and we are going to put them on our website. I'm not exactly sure where they're going to be housed on Game and Parks' website, but they will be on there either tomorrow or starting on Monday. So that's all I have. I see we have a couple. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. But I do see they have a couple questions, I think. Oh, nope, just comments. All right, so does anyone have any questions? I'll open it up 5-10 minutes for questions here. But I do want to give you guys opportunity to ask questions if you have them. So you can certainly unmute your microphones if you need to. Otherwise, you guys are free to head out. I appreciate you joining us today. I know 3 o'clock is kind of a hard time to get here on a weekday, but I appreciate everyone that came out. And does anyone have any questions? I'll stick around for about 5 minutes or so. And if you have any questions or just want to say hi, let me know.
Yeah, I forgot. What is prehensile tongue?
So a prehensile tongue is when they can grab stuff and actually hold things with it. If you ever have heard about opossums, they have a prehensile tail, kind of, not very long. They can kind of hold on for a little bit, but they actually can grasp things like a hand. So good question. Someone asked, do Orioles have a little brush on the end of their tongue? That is a good question, Charlene. I'm not sure if they actually do or not. Anyone knows me, I'm definitely not a bird person, but that's a good question. I can look it up and certainly shoot you an email if I can figure out the answer to that. Good question.
Monica, I just looked that up really quick.
Yeah,
and,
Jamie.
And it is, they do appear.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to find a good, they do, I haven't found anything that says why.
Okay. I mean, it kind of makes sense, I guess, because I mean, we have an Oriole feeder in our house, and I mean, it looks similar to a hummingbird feeder, so it makes perfect sense. That's a good question. I had no idea. Good question. All right. And again, if you guys missed it, or if you would like someone else to watch this, if they have some extra time, I will put these on either our online education webpage for Game and Parks, or otherwise our Nebraska Project Wild page on the main page of Game and Parks. So either way, I will let you guys know. I will send you all an email letting you know that it's up and when it's up. So again, thank you guys. Someone asked, do dogs drink water by scooping it up with their tongue? Sort of. I can't remember exactly, Heidi. I looked it up today. It's similar to like a cat tongue. It like bends kind of backwards. I can't remember. That's a good question. I need to look that up as well.
I couldn't remember for sure either, but
yeah,
I know there's a good video about it somewhere.
Yeah, and same with the cat video I saw today. Like, I think it was MIT actually made a similar model that showed like the pressure of like a cat tongue and how it was really neat. And I assume that it's kind of the same concept for that, but I'm not exactly sure. Good question. Yeah, I see you guys have your hands raised. Do you have a question? Can you guys unmute yourself? I can't hear you. No? Okay, that's fine.
Who's gonna start?
Do you guys have a question?
Who said deals? Someone's about deals. Who said deals? Who said deals?
Did you guys have a question?
She just completely said deals for nothing. She just said stuff for nothing.
Okay. All right, that's okay.
She never knows anything.
All right.
No, you don't.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to head out, but if any of you guys have any more questions, please feel free to email me and get in touch. Otherwise, we will talk to you next week. Thank you.
Hey, buddy, turn it off.